Hi, I'm Stefan. I promised you a video on how I coded my own synchronizer for the Synclavier. Nerd alert, you must be a huge fan of seriously vintage music technology to enjoy this video, but if you are, grab a drink because this will get pretty serious. First off, you might ask, what's the fuss all about? Why didn't I just plug into timecode? I'm glad you asked. Short answer, the Synclavier doesn't have SMPTE timecode connection. It also doesn't have MIDI, obviously, because it was built long before MIDI even existed. There's also no FSK, there's no pulse clock. It's odd to think that something called the Synclavier was never meant to be synced to anything. My challenge was to synchronize this random note texture I had programmed to the rest of my MIDI sequence. And here is how I did it. I started with my Yamaha RX-11, a beautiful drum machine. I bought mine in 1984 when it had just been released. I honestly thought I would never need another drum sound. One of the things that sets this apart from its smaller sibling, the RX-15, is that it has individual outputs for all these instruments, which is exactly what I needed. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a review of this thing. Just kidding. Now on the MIDI sequencer running on my Mac Plus, no DAWs back then, right, just MIDI, I programmed a special track for the RX-11. This was Performer version 2.2, pretty cool software for what it could do. And that track contained nothing but 16th note cowbells from start to finish. Next, I took a 1/4-inch cable. I went from the cowbell out of the RX-11 into this box right here, which I no longer have, an MFB 601, a very early digital sequencer for analog synthesizers. I used to control my Moog with that, which I do still have. How about a review of this thing? Maybe a little more tempting? Anyway, on this sequencer, I programmed just a very short loop of only 2 notes, the highest note it could play and the lowest note it could play. That makes, you guessed it, a square wave control voltage, right? Now that sequencer usually runs off its internal clock, but it can also be clocked externally with an audio trigger, like that RX-11 cowbell. Then I took another 1/4-inch cable, went from the CV out, cut off the plug on the other end, soldered on a banana plug, and that went into this contraption right here. This is a 16-channel ADA interface for control voltages that was built by, I believe, students and faculty at the University of Victoria, where I was taking undergraduate electronic music classes. 2 big ribbon cables from this interface were connected to this card, and this card was in the main frame of the Synclavier. The interface functioned as the babblefish between the Synclavier and a beautiful Buchla 200 system we had at the lab. This is me in 1984 working at the Buchla. To this day, definitely the coolest analog synth that I've ever used. And with this interface, these 2 synths could talk to each other. You could get these incredible experimental feedback loops going. Some people might call that pointless. I thought it was fascinating. Now everything I said so far is technical, yes, but pretty straightforward. Now things get a little more complicated because you see, when the Synclavier was built, real-time interactive systems were few and far between. If you wanted to program a melody in this machine, you had to work in pairs, frequencies in hertz and durations in milliseconds. Here's a table of what that might look like. Of course, there was some more code involved, but this is the basic note data, and the melody would sound like this. Take a look at the first note. It lasts 200 milliseconds, and during this time you couldn't do anything else on the machine. It was busy playing that note and only that note. As soon as the note was over, it would grab the next note off the table and continue until all these instructions were executed. This means that while it was playing, you couldn't interact with the synthesizer. You couldn't press a key, push a front panel button, or send a control voltage. Let's say you wanted to add another voice to this, things would get even more tricky because now you'd have to keep track of time across 2 note tables. And believe me, as you kept adding voices, things could get ugly fast. The solution to this problem was developed by my former electronic music professor, Doug Collins. He wrote an extension to the Synclavier programming language called Moxie. In Moxie, notes would simply get scheduled As soon as they were scheduled, which only took a few CPU cycles, the machine was free to do something else, like schedule more notes. In Moxie, the core unit of the code structure was an action. That could be playing a note, for example. So you could turn this note table into an action, make a copy of it, change the channel assignment and make it a little faster. Now you'd have a pretty complicated Steve Reich-style minimal phase piece where one voice plays a little faster than the other. They gradually drift out of sync to create these complex rhythms. You know how that goes, right? It's actually what you're hearing in the background. This would be impossible with the standard Synclavier programming language, but in Moxie it was easy. The user code for this study is actually only 24 lines long. But not only that, because scheduling notes wasn't very taxing on the CPU, Doug added another section to the code structure called background. In the background you could do whatever else you wanted to do as long as nothing time critical, like playing notes, was happening in the foreground. All the scheduling of notes, prioritization, switching between the foreground and the background was handled for you. You didn't even have to think about it. It still amazes me how Doug was able to come up with all this while teaching full-time and raising a family. This is a phenomenal accomplishment. But you know what else is phenomenal? That you're still here watching me talk about this ancient music tech. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this bit of my personal electronic music history. I hereby award you the official Geek Medal in gold for watching this video. Now you want to know if there's any cash value in this, right? Actually there is. As you may know, or will find out later in this video, the code I created for the Synclavier was eventually emulated as a virtual instrument for Native Instruments Kontakt, and I want to give you a free copy. If you have a full version of Kontakt, just send me a message via my website with the magic words Geek Gold Medal, and I'll be happy to send you a free copy. Now, moving right along, in Moxie's background, I monitored the first AD input on the interface for a sudden rise in control voltage, which of course came from the MFB sequencer, which came from the RX-11 cowbell, which came from the MIDI sequencer playing cowbell. So you see at the end of this long chain of hardware, Moxie background triggered an action to play one of these random notes. With a bit of debugging, I had finally succeeded in locking the Synclavier to the rest of my MIDI studio, and I thought there's no way I have gone to this much trouble just to play dumb random eighth notes all day long. The first thing I got rid of was the hard-coded scale. Instead, when the program started, there was a prompt where you could enter pitch classes, which meant you could play in any key. But what made it more interesting, I flipped a virtual coin with adjustable probability. If it came up heads, it played a random note. If it came up tails, it didn't. Why is that interesting? Because now I could control the density of the notes, right? Suddenly there was rhythm. Cool, I flipped another coin for timbre. That was easy because the Synclavier, of course, is an FM instrument. For each note, I added a random amount of frequency modulation. Again, fully scalable. There could be subtle variations or drastic changes. I flipped another coin for register, so notes didn't all stay in the same octave. I could have random octave displacements. And I just kept going until I ran out of ideas for what else to randomize. In the end, I had quite a powerful virtual instrument, and that makes me feel like a bit of a pioneer because in 1991, when I finished this code, we weren't even using the term virtual instrument yet. Because it was so flexible, it became one of my favorite production tools throughout the 90s and early 2000s. On almost every album, I'd find at least one track to use it on. But then music changed, my studio changed, everything gradually moved from racks of hardware into the box. You know how it goes, right? I even put the Synclavier in storage until the day a synth collector wanted to buy it. I took the opportunity because the hardware was aging, but I felt so sad that I'd never hear this again. I didn't know how to save this code. Out of desperation, I recorded tons of variations of this instrument. A completely helpless act, really. But was it a good idea? Absolutely. because a few years later I realized I could emulate some of this random switching logic in Native Instruments Kontakt, except Kontakt isn't an FM synth, right? It's a sample player. Well, great. I had thousands of samples, right? I boiled them down, handpicked the best 700 some, and ended up with a perfect emulation. I'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. This instrument is now part of my Synclavier sample library. This includes historically significant presets from this first ever commercially released digital synthesizer, and also a random assortment of sounds I found on my floppy disks. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Thanks for watching.